Hi everybody, and welcome to WTF Hammer Underworlds. Today's video is going to be a Season 1 Warband balancing video looking at the Spiteclaw Swarm. In the description I've linked the video to the Spiteclaw Swarm review video that I posted, which gave a description of all the fighter cards and faction specific cards of this warband, and after analyzing everything I came to the following conclusions. 1. Spiteclaw Swarm has a great set of power cards which enable them to have effective movement, control, and attack options. 2. The ploy-centered Inspire mechanic can actually be quite effective, allowing these units to inspire quite easily, but requires that the player cater their power deck to this Inspire mechanic. 3. This warband excels at a flex style, meaning that with their natural fighter card abilities and high movement, they're good at both attacking and holding objective tokens. However, their objective cards rather favor risky aggression and survival, which is a bit of a mismatch, which results in these guys relying heavily on universal objective cards, and it's these universal objective cards that tend to determine how effective they will be in any given meta. And finally, this warband also depends on Scritch's summoning ability, meaning that Scritch's survival is very necessary, but fortunately, Scritch is the greatest. So when looking at all these things, I had rated this warband as a B, meaning that these guys require an assist. So what I'm going to be doing in this video is I'm going to be proposing errata suggestions and new faction specific cards that I would recommend to help give these guys that necessary assist that they need in order to become competitive. And I'll be starting by looking at errata, which in other words means modifications to their existing rule set that could be made to help strengthen this warband. And I actually don't have an extensive errata suggestion for these guys, considering that I did rank them B, so they aren't by any means a weak warband, but I still do have some suggestions. I'm going to be starting with objective card errata. Firstly, that brilliant be worth 2 glory points. So if you read the description of this card, it's basically a combination strike card. Unfortunately, it's only worth 1 glory point as it stands, so my recommendation would just be to make this card worth 2 glory points, just like combination strike. My justification being that it would make it equivalent to combination strike, which would be especially nice for this warband, considering that combination strike is a Season 2 universal card, meaning that it's going to be cycled out soon, which would provide this warband with a nice, unique card that other warbands wouldn't have access to. And it also makes thematic sense, seeing as these are Skaven, they are a scheming warband, and combination strike sort of fits that scheming style. Next, we're moving on to power card errata, and my recommendations here are actually pretty minor. All I'd recommend is that the wording of Aversion to Death and Skaven Courage be changed slightly just to include the word choose in it. And the reason I do this is that the Inspire mechanic of Skaven requires that a ploy be used that chooses any given Skaven, and then that Skaven becomes inspired. But that keyword choose literally has to be included on the ploy in order for it to be functional in this way. Aversion to Death can be reworded to reaction. Play this after an attack action that takes a friendly fighter out of action. Choose up to 2 friendly fighters and push them 1 hex each, which will therefore allow 2 units to become inspired immediately after this card is played. And with regard to Skaven Courage, I just recommend the wording be changed ever so slightly so that it reads, play this if there are at least 3 friendly fighters adjacent to the same enemy fighter. Choose one of those friendly fighters to make an attack action, which will also allow whichever fighter that is being chosen to inspire upon the playing of this card. My justification for this is that Skaven can only be inspired by ploy cards that choose them, and by changing the wording to choose on these 2 cards, it would make these 2 cards more viable as power cards to be selected by players playing Spiteclaw Swarm. Because as it stands, it could often be a tough choice between choosing useful cards and choosing cards that simply have the word choose on them, because on the one hand, you want to be able to make effective use of your warband, but on the other hand, you want to make sure that you can inspire them, and there are actually a fairly limited number of cards that have that choose keyword written on them. And that actually does it for my errata suggestions, so nothing major here. Just to quickly summarize, for objective cards, I'd recommend that brilliant be worth 2 glory points instead of 1, and for power card errata, I'd just recommend changing the wording of Aversion to Death and Skaven Courage to include the word choose so that they can be used to inspire Skaven. My final balancing suggestion are some new faction specific cards. Now I present this every balancing video that I make, and all I'm trying to do here is illustrate how I would recommend that Games Workshop introduce new faction specific cards so that it works well within the existing framework that they have with Dreadfane and with Beastgrave. And this is my suggestion. Deck building typically requires 12 objective and 20 or more power cards, which must be made up of 10 Gambits, and 10 upgrades, and you can have more upgrades than Gambits, but not vice versa. Spiteclaw's Swarm only has 10 objectives and only 10 Gambits, while it has 11 upgrades. Therefore, these guys would need 2 objective cards in order to have a valid play out of the box deck. And I'd also give them another Gambit card so that they have a 50-50 split of power cards with upgrade. And therefore, my solution for these guys would just be to create 2 useful objective cards and 1 useful Gambit card that could improve the versatility of their faction-specific deck and would also allow them to be able to be played out of the box just like the more modern warbands are capable of being played. Now, to my specific suggestions, first I'm going to start with objective cards. My first idea for a new faction-specific objective card would be some kind of a surge card that takes advantage of this warband's ability to easily enter enemy territory. So this warband is actually very exceptional at entering enemy territory because every unit in this warband has high movement, and Scritch's summoning special ability allows him to summon one of 3 particular Skaven onto any starting hex, which could also include enemy territory. And my suggestion to take advantage of this mechanic would be a faction-specific Swift Capture, which could be called Speedy Infestation, and it would be worded as Swift Capture is worded, which is as follows. It's a surge, it's a dual card. You score this immediately after an activation if your warband holds 1 or more objectives in friendly territory, and your warband holds 1 or more objectives in enemy territory worth 1 glory point. My justification is that this warband has no hold objective cards whatsoever in their faction-specific objective card list, which is unfortunate because these guys are actually pretty good at holding objective tokens. Furthermore, and more importantly in some ways, is that it fits thematically with the fact that Skaven invade others' territory, that they infest and are just bothersome, and Swift Capture really just fits perfectly with the theme of Skaven. My second idea would be some kind of easy to score surge card. So nothing crazy, just to give them another useful surge card because their current faction specific surge cards are not very useful. They basically require that Scritch take enemy units out of action, which is not a strategy that I would really recommend considering how important Scritch is to this warband. And my suggestion would be a surge version of Ploy Master, which could be called Effective Scheming. Now, for those of you who are newer to the game, Ploy Master was a universal objective card from Season 1, and it read, score this in an end phase if you played 3 or more ploys in the previous round. And I would just suggest reword it so that this warband can score this immediately if they play 3 or more ploys in a round. And my justification is that these guys do not have very reliable surge cards, as I mentioned. And furthermore, kind of like with Swift Capture, Skaven are sneaky, and this is a sneaky style of objective card. And also, ploys are the foundation of the Inspire mechanic of Spiteclaw's Swarm, so it makes sense to have an objective card that scores glory points based on the playing of ploys, because ploys are very central to the strategy of this warband. And that does it for my suggestions for objective cards. My final suggestion is a power card, specifically a Gambit. And my idea would be just some simple card to allow the deck to be valid. And by valid, just to make it so that this warband would have 11 Gambits to complement their 11 upgrade cards. And my suggestion, it would just be a faction-specific determined effort, which would be called Backstab, which would just give a +1 dice for the first attack action in the next activation. So nothing major, nothing exceptional, just a versatile little card that could help this warband out a little bit if they chose to include it in their deck. My justification would be that this warband has no ploy cards that improve accuracy, and Determined Defender is always useful, but it's also not an overpowered card, so it could just be a nice little addition to the Spiteclaw Swarm deck without breaking the bank. And that's actually it for my video. So my errata are summarized above, and just to reiterate the new faction-specific cards I'd recommend. For objective cards, I'd recommend that Games Workshop release 2 new objective cards so that this warband can have a play out of the box deck. The 2 objective cards I'd recommend would be a faction-specific Swift Capture, which could be called Speedy Infestation, and a surge version of Ploy Master, which could be called Effective Scheming. And finally, the new Gambit Ploy card I'd recommend would be a faction-specific Determined Effort, which could be called Backstab, just to provide a little bit of versatility to their deck and to once again make the deck valid and play out of the box. So I thank you for watching my video. If you have any thoughts or suggestions, please comment below. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like them. And next week, we're going to be covering the Farstriders.